Tell us about your conviction of, what
Well,
brought you to your position.
okay, so when we say conviction, I wouldn't say I'm 100% sure about anything. I'm not a subjectivist, but I still, other than not again. Oh my god.
And the police is
Every
are they
week,
just,
man.
Are they just watching? Two adults behaving like children.
Yeah. In your own time, officers. Sure, sorry. Are you going to edit the bits with the? All right. So
Well, that doesn't happen routinely in the park.
yeah.
There seems to be sometimes these things get escalated.
So so I guess I would say I don't think you can be sort of 100% sure when you make claims regarding the supernatural, when you make claims about God, which is why I wouldn't say I 100% know that there is no God, but I'm sort of suspicious of people who make claims of absolute certainty unless it's regarding mathematical truths. I mean, if you say that you're certain 2 + 2 = 4, that's a pretty solid, I wouldn't dispute that. But insofar as God or Allah is concerned, I sort of I haven't really seen any real strong argument. So I don't know if you want to begin with a sort of.
What's the difference between arguments and evidence?
So, well,
in your understanding?
In my understanding, an argument would be a proposition of sorts, which is supported by evidence, which would be what can be observed in reality, in the physical world.
Sure. So arguments can be supported or unsupported by evidence. So basically evidence is something something which we should be looking for rather than arguments themselves, because arguments can have counter-arguments, and it could go into even the areas of rhetoric. Whoever is a bit more in rhetoric and eloquent, it may whitewash or smoke screen the whole issue. So evidence is what counts.
I mean, you make arguments based on the evidence, but
Yes.
you're right that you shouldn't dress it up with the rhetoric.
You can make arguments neglecting the evidence.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Sure. So evidence is very important.
Of course.
So in terms of this reality, does the reality exist? Is this something that we say we have evidence for?
Yes.
Without making say like, oh, this is only an argument.
So what? The statement "reality exists" is that
that we are real and the reality around us exists. Is this something that requires an argument, or is this something that's self-evident?
I would say. An objectivist would say existence is self-evident. Certainly mine is, to me, as Descartes says, cogito ergo sum. The fact that I'm able to ask that question means certainly that I exist. So I'd say 100% sure that I exist, 99.9% sure that you exist, talking to me.
Yeah, so at least you know you exist.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you come into existence if there were no cause to bring you into existence? Do you somehow accept that you can exist without any prior cause of your existence?
Well, I would regard my parents as being my direct cause.
And you go back
If you go back
go?
to okay, right. So yes, I would say I would say I'm satisfied with my own existence without some divine creator. Without any God having made me in the beginning. I think it's reasonable. Sorry.
So you're agreeing that you exist.
Yes.
And if the question is asked, how do you exist without something or someone bringing you into existence? Two possibilities. Existence like yourself, or things prior to yourself, could be rearrangement of matter, and it could be just a rearrangement of matter.
That's essentially yes.
So are you proposing that matter essentially is eternally existent without any prior beginning? Or,
not necessarily.
Or all of these things which we call reality had a beginning of existence which required a cause which brought it into existence.
I would go a bit radical and say neither of those. So Immanuel Kant said he identified that they were the two options that you could have. Either, never mind me, but say existence, say the universe. Either the universe is eternal and has always existed and gone back in time. I don't say that because that seems sort of unlikely, but he says the other option is that the universe began to exist at a point that we might call the Big Bang. But he says that that's equally absurd because if that is true, then there was an infinite time before even the universe began. And so he says how both of these are equally absurd and we can't know which is true. But if you look at recent developments in cosmology, and if you read Stephen Hawking's books on various sort of essays on time, in a brief history of time, he talks about a third option which solves the problem of a sort of eternity, which is that space-time can be finite but exist in a sort of no boundary condition. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that more or if you know. So he says essentially we're still looking for a kind of unified theory of both quantum mechanics and also the theory of gravity, because so far gravity and the quantum field of physical study have been quite hard to reconcile. But he says that although we haven't got a unified quantum theory of gravity just at the moment, he says we can be sure of some elements which that theory has to have. And he says one of them is Richard Feynman's proposal for a sum of histories of particles, and he says the other one has to be Einstein's idea of a sort of curved space-time. And when you bring those two together, which cosmologists, Feynman and Hawking, people he's written books with, are pretty sure about, it would look like a curved Euclidean, which means four-dimensional space-time, in which there is no distinction between space and time, exist. And he says, and if you apply that, then if you use you add the numbers up in imaginary time, you are able to get a sort of space-time which is not infinite. It is finite, but it's in the same way that the Earth doesn't really have a boundary. The Earth is finite, but there's no boundary. If you're going around the globe, you will just keep going round. So it's a very difficult concept to understand, and I appreciate I can't really do it justice here.
May I ask a question? Can I ask a question? I'm kind of agnostic. I'm not really sure whether they'll go or not.
Sure.
But I do find what they call the Kalam cosmological argument quite reasonable.
So which Kalam cosmological argument is
okay,
that?
okay. Well, let me give my.
Is it William Lane Craig's?
No. Let me just give my understanding, simplistic understanding. I mean, basically the idea that everything has a cause, as far as we know, and if you keep taking that cause back, you'll just go on ad infinitum. And therefore it seems reasonable to speculate that there may be a supernatural force that started it.
Yeah, you can speculate that.
Call it God if you want.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not closed to the possibility
I'm not saying that is true, but I'm not denying it. I mean, it seems to be a reasonable
possibility.
Theory.
I'm not denying that it's 0% likely. I'm saying it just seems to be. Do you mind if I get my notes out on Kalam? I've got the Kalam document here.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Please.
Is that all right? Interrupt me if any time you want.
No.
Yeah, no, so I've got the Kalam here. So premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Number two, the universe began to exist. Conclusion is the universe has a cause. So I've got several problems with this argument because, for one, you can't really say that everything that begins to exist does have a cause, because we don't know that, because really the only thing that you could say has begun to exist would be the universe itself. So you're really only saying, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. So it's not really...
But there is a causational series of events, isn't there?
Yes.
From that...
Well, yes there is, but... Okay, so the way to solve that, either you have the sort of infinite, the eternal universe, which I don't believe in, by the way, because I think it could be a possibility, but I don't really sort of see it. But I think that if you've got this model of Euclidean curved space-time, that sort of solves your problem of having an infinite regress, because the theory of gravity itself predicts that its own predictions break down at the quantum level, and thus at the Big Bang, and so we would sort of cease to know how time. Basically, prior to the Big Bang, any any occurrences before the Big Bang would essentially be meaningless, and you wouldn't be able to predict what came after the Big Bang because there was such a breakdown of the theory of relativity. That's not a great way to explain it. Can I give you my sort of reverse cosmological argument? So I have to confess this is not mine. But so premise one: nothing which exists can cause something non-existent to begin existing. So I can't, me who exists, I can't just bring in a rabbit from a hat into the world unless it's,
So you've got to start with something.
Yeah. So nothing which exists, such as me, can cause something non-existent to begin existing.
Yes, but that's something that exists in this physical material world.
Sorry?
That's something that exists in this physical material world.
What about
Yes, what about something that exists outside of this world?
Well, can you bring something in from outside the world into this world?
Not within the parameters of the physical world as we know it.
But in the cosmos, you're saying it's possible.
Perhaps outside of the cosmos, but on another deeper level, with what you've said, do you agree that the universe has got consciousness?
Has got consciousness. I had this discussion with Sis a couple of weeks ago. Does the universe have consciousness?
Yes.
Insofar as we have consciousness and we're part of the universe, yes. Insofar as, unconscious objects, no, of course they don't have consciousness. By definition, the fence does not have consciousness, and that's part of the universe as well. So, does consciousness exist in the universe? Yes. But
And what do you think is the source of consciousness?
what is the source of consciousness? I don't know.
But don't you think it's a very important question?
It is an important question, but I don't think you're any more justified in saying that it's God than I think it's quite reasonable to say we're not too sure. I think you could certainly say consciousness is an emergent property. I mean, we know that that living organisms were originated from non-living organisms. Even if you reject that the Miller-Urey experiment proved that it happened on Earth, we still know that abiogenesis is possible. And so I think from single-celled organisms, that's a reasonable explanation as to how beings can become, from unicellular to multicellular, and thus become more complicated, more evolved, and thus be more conscious. I'm sorry, this was meant to be a discussion.
No.
I'm sorry, we've silenced him.
It's good. It's quite good that we're having a discussion so we can have our input. Carry on. What do you have to say?
Sorry. So what would be your response?
Because I think, when you're looking at your model of the universe, and I've only just walked in the last minute.
Yeah, of
so
course.
my guess is you're somebody who's either an agnostic or somebody who's not ultra-religious, obviously.
I'm not altruist.
No, so you're obviously not religious.
I'm not religious, no.
So
yes,
the thrust of your argument was physicality, and you're basically arguing against the existence of the God.
Yes.
And the comeback, there are all sorts of arguments that people can throw at you.
Yeah.
But the one that I think is the most difficult for you to hurdle over is consciousness. It's the fact that you are now conscious. Because, if the universe just existed as it is, that's quite amazing. But if the universe exists with consciousness, that's even more extraordinary.
It is,
What is consciousness exactly? I mean, I'm not trying to be funny.
No, it's a great question.
Genuinely want to know.
It's a spectacular question. I agree. It's not so easy to define. So we think about. I could throw it back at you and say, who's asked the question? Right? Who has actually asked that question?
Me.
And who are you when you say me? Is it your mind, or is there something else there?
My mind, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether you read any of Yuval Harari's books.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
I think he talked about consciousness briefly, and he was saying that. I mean, there are various views, and one of the views is that it's just a lot of neurons firing off and giving this, if you like, an illusion of something.
I'm not inclined to subscribe to that thesis.
Sorry?
I'm not inclined to agree with Yuval Harari. But
I'm not saying
I agree. And I
either.
imagine you're very much on the same page as Yuval Harari.
Is he arguing against free will?
No, it's not against free will. It's basically saying there's no such thing as consciousness. It's just your mind is a very complex thing.
No, I think
your brain is
exists.
an incredibly complicated thing.
He thinks consciousness doesn't exist, though, does he?
Only
I think
within
that was
your
one
mind.
of the views that he was giving. I don't necessarily agree with him either.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just don't know.
Well, Rand identified consciousness as one of the three primary axioms of, I guess you could say, logic or the material, along with existence and identity. So you have existence, which predicates consciousness, and then you also have identity. These are three. I think she called them the sort of bases of knowledge, really, because you in order to have consciousness, you have to first exist, and then with that comes a sense of identity, in that you have, because we're finite beings, we have a certain identity, we have specific attributes, and then from that is the foundation on which you can build a sort of understanding. You know, you use your reason to gain, to assemble knowledge in reality about what is best for your own survival, and that comes the pillar of self-interest, and from that's where we that's how she sort of reasoned that.
But why are you conscious right now? So from a religious perspective, from the argument of a religious person, every moment in consciousness only exists because you were conscious the immediate moment before. Right? Going back infinitely.
Not infinitely, no. I wasn't conscious before I was born.
Well, how do you know?
Sorry? You think I was conscious before I was born?
Can you remember?
Well, so one sec. The fetus. Sorry, I should have said before I was conceived, really. But you're right in that the fetus gains consciousness. Scientists think about 24 weeks in. In 24 weeks in. Before 24 weeks, they're not conscious. But, okay, before I was conceived, then I should say.
But you see, nobody can actually remember accurately their very first conscious moment. You can't remember the very first time you were conscious.
No.
Essentially, what you're saying is consciousness is the emergent property of the rearrangement of the function of matter. That's what you're proposing. Because consciousness didn't come from anywhere. You're saying matter is there, they're rearranging themselves in their proportion, whether you want to go to the micro level or the quantum level. This rearrangement gives rise to levels of consciousness. The fact that this is matter, this fence, and you're matter too, but the rearrangement of this fence hasn't happened to the level that it happened to you. So that's what consciousness emerged. Okay? I find it is extraordinary in sort of accepting this kind of claims. Just matter can just simply rearrange by themselves.
But it doesn't just simply rearrange, it's not spontaneous.
So this rearrangement, actually, before we talk about rearrangement, let's return back to the same question that we were taking. So this existence, you proposed a third option. I'm still trying to understand where this option is. Right? So either things have always been in existence, or they haven't been always in existence. We can look at this in a binary sense, because what's the third option? The two options are things have always been in existence. There is no beginning of these things. Matter, whatever you want to call it, always been there. Or they haven't been always been there. But there's some point where they became existent in this reality. You're proposing a third option. I don't understand what that option is. Would you mind elaborating a bit more in a layman's term? What is that third option in between?
You must tell me if you want to stay okay.
Eternity without any beginning, and there is a finite beginning of somehow. When I say finite, I'm not talking about the finite you're going to describe mathematically, philosophically. I'm saying...
Yeah, you mean the Big Bang, right?
No, of course not. Big Bang is just a model. Why people?
Oh, you don't believe in the Big Bang? Okay,
no. It's not about I don't believe in the Big Bang. Big Bang is just one of the many models of the emergence of our particular universe.
It's a pretty strong model. It's survived a lot of the evidence that the standard model of inflation hasn't survived. Okay.
Out of many models, right? So it doesn't mean this is what I'm talking about. I'm saying you have either existence which had no beginning or existence which has a beginning, right? So obviously beginning itself is quite questionable in the sense that you can ask, what do you mean by beginning? Is it linked with time or not? And that's why your equations you're bringing in is going to, I think, try to solve something mathematically. When I say existence eternally, I mean it was always there. Always there. It means whatever concept of time that you have, it is always been there. Okay? Whatever you can imagine, there was something there always. The opposition or the contrary model to this is, no, there wasn't something always there. So there wasn't this always business there. Okay? So what third option can there be?
No, there could. You see, you think that time is linear. It's not necessarily linear.
I didn't say time is linear. I said
you're implying there's a beginning.
I didn't imply there's a beginning. Okay. I'm saying there are two options.
He's saying it's binary.
I'm saying, if you think about it, there cannot be more than two options.
Exactly. And I'm disagreeing.
When you say there can be, okay, give us a third option.
A third option is string theory. Where the idea is, it starts off, there's like a Big Bang. The universe, just hear me out.
Oh, sorry.
There's an expansion from like a Big Bang concept. Doesn't mean it was the first Big Bang. The universe keeps on expanding for a vast period of time. Then as a result, of things like dark matter and gravity, eventually the universe just implodes on itself and the whole process starts again over 15 billion years. And for all we know, that whole process has been going on and off infinitely.
Right. So you're essentially saying what I am proposing. When you say starts off, let's start with your first statement. Starts off with what? From what?
Maybe it existed forever. Maybe that whole process of expanding and contracting
has
gone on forever.
Sorry to interrupt. Remember, I am proposing there is only two scenarios. When you say it starts off, brother. When you say it starts off, either it was already there or it wasn't there. Whatever is starting off, is it starting off from something that is existent or something that is non-existent?
You see, again, it's not that it was ever non-existent. It has always existed, perhaps.
Then there is no third option from your point. You agree with me? Do you have a third option?
Can I just ask you something? I'm sorry to answer the question with the question, but just before we go on, do you agree that the universe began, I should say existence began at some point, right? I would assume yes, because God created all that exists.
The reality that we're talking about, because as a Muslim, you can say this existence is a creation of God that was brought into existence.
Okay.
But God existed always.
Yeah, sure. No, I get that. I get that.
So, but our particular reality was brought into existence.
Okay.
So before we go into what I believe, and we want to actually go to the very first principles and try to understand, how you come to your position.
But I just wanted to ask. I'll let you go on. I just want to ask a question.
So I believe there's something always in existence. Yeah. In this proposition of mine, there are two binary options, and I would say the one that makes sense rationally, the one that makes sense logically, reasonably, is the one that is always been something in existence. You say these binary options, there's a third option. What is that third?
So, as I said, can I ask you, have you read A Brief History of Time?
Long time ago,
yes. Long time. It's the idea of a Euclidean curved space-time. So
use layman's terms.
Okay, all right.
So that everyone can understand, right?
All right.
Because if you're not a physicist or a mathematician or someone, a cosmologist, okay. People, they'll all be lost.
Right. I don't know. It's a pretty technical book, but insofar as I can understand it as a layman, he says that you have to incorporate into this unified theory, what we might call a quantum theory of gravity, that you need what Richard Feynman proposed, what he called the sum of all histories, the sum over histories of a particle, which is the idea that a particle in existence doesn't just have one history, but it actually follows every single possible path in existence that it possibly could have. And he says that in order to in order to add up the numbers to which you derive from waves, I won't go into it, but in order to add up the numbers which are associated with each of these histories, you run into technical problems, and thus you need to do the addition with imaginary time rather than real time. And imaginary time is this idea that he derives from what's called Euclidean space-time. Euclidean space-time just means a time and space which is four-dimensional and where there is no distinction between time and space. Okay, and then the other aspect that he says this theory needs to have is that it needs to have Einstein's idea of curved space-time, curved gravity. Okay, so it is just a theory, but he's saying, of course, we don't know, what the theory is, but Hawking just says that, assuming this theory exists, these are two elements which we can be pretty certain it will have. So, I don't know who said that, but it was...
Certainty comes after.
Sorry?
Certainty comes after assuming.
No, we're uncertain.
You said 50 is 2
Yes. The two elements, yeah. Yes.
Assuming that they are factory, then this certainty comes out.
He's not taking them. Okay, so what's my point? Okay, all right. What's my point is that if you apply this, I'm going to keep saying the Euclidean curved spacetime because that's Hawking's model that he comes up with. If you apply that to the cosmos, you end up with what's called the no boundary condition, where time is like the globe, where it's finite. It's not infinite as you say it is, but it's without boundary. And if you keep going around the Earth, you're not going to hit a barrier. You can keep going, but the globe is not infinite.
Let me simplify it for you.
Okay.
Because I think you're really much into this confusion of the technicality and jargons of science.
I'm sorry, I can't put it in more layman's
It's not
terms,
about you can't put it, because essentially, as I said, existence, we understand what it means, right? Non-existence, we understand by the opposite of existence. So I'm saying there has always been existence, as opposed to there was non-existence, but you're saying there's something in between. There's a third option. Your mathematical Euclidean, all this science and philosophy being merged into this grand unified theories or whatever, right? A third option is either what? What is this third option? I'm still trying to understand your third option. The options I propose is something has always been existing. Remember, I said something. That something could be time, space, matter, energy, particles, quantum, hadrons, leptons, you name it, whatever. It's a thing. It's a thing. There is something that is always in existence, or that it hasn't been for our reality.
Okay, right, I see.
So
I see. When
you bring your propositions about a third option, I'm at a loss to understand what it is.
I think I get you. I think that's my function. I elaborate. So